And welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. Christian Clemente here, joined by Jason Caldwell. Jason, it was not the result that Auburn wanted on Saturday against Cal, losing 21-14. You and Nathan and Philip, everyone's covered that really in depth, but now we're going to talk about some recruiting and the recruiting ramifications of what happened on Saturday. Jason, the first question, and it's been asked a lot on the board. It's been asked specifically with guys like Deuce Knight, who we're going to go in depth on later on in the show. But what does a loss on Saturday really do for a recruiting class in terms of, Auburn trying to get guys, Auburn trying to keep its guys?
Yeah, I don't know that it impacts things a great deal. All of these guys were committed before this season ever started. Now, I think they're committed thinking, okay, it's going to be a better season. It's going to be improved. We're 2 games in. Saturday wasn't pretty. But I don't know that it impacts things a great deal. If anything, it can be a selling point. Going, look, this is exactly why we're bringing you in. It's because we need to improve the talent level. And Hugh Freaks talked about that on Monday. Going, look, this is still a work in progress, and I'm right there with him. And I think back to what we've talked about really for the past 12 to 18 months. Going, how is this thing going to work? Are you building a team or are you building a program? I think if you're building a team, then you probably would have said, oh, okay, we're going to focus more on transfers, try to make it a 1-year run, and then you figure it out the next year. I don't think that's the way Hugh Freeze wanted to do this. Who knows? It may be completely wrong and it might not work. That may be how you have to do it in this day and age. I don't think it is. I still look at Georgia and I still look at Ohio State and others. Yeah, they're going to the transfer market, but they're also recruiting really well and adding pieces to a roster. So I think that's what Hugh Freeze envisions. And so that means it might take a little bit longer. Again, did we envision Auburn losing to Cal Saturday? No, I did not. But I also did not envision this team being 12-0. So there's still a lot of football left to be played. Lots of opportunities to go out and show guys that, hey, we're moving up. If you're Auburn, talking to those guys, going, hey, look, we're moving up the ladder. We're continuing to get better, but we need more pieces. And so I still think that's a selling point.
One of the pieces that Auburn wants the most in this class and that Auburn fans want to know the most about is Deuce Knight, the most talked about recruit in the Auburn sphere right now. Message boards, Twitter, having casual conversations, running into people that you don't even really know or meeting them for the first time, and they want to know what's happening with Deuce Knight. Well, we passed his second straight game visit. He was in for the Alabama A&M opener, in for the Cal game. We thought directly after the Alabama A&M game, he had a big rivalry game in his high school football on Friday night before the Cal game. We thought once he got through that, looked like things were setting up for him to potentially do something last weekend. As it turns out, throughout the course of the week leading into the Cal game, has some productive conversations with some of the Notre Dame staff, specifically a guy like Marcus Freeman, the head coach, who he's built a really strong connection with. And he shows up on campus for a visit, but nothing happens. He comes with his whole family again, the same group that came for the Alabama A&M game, stayed overnight, didn't leave until Sunday. I'm sure he had extensive meetings with guys like Coach Freeze, Ken Austin, Derek Nix. I know he spent a ton of time with Alvin Henderson. Guys like Cale Ellis said he spent a lot of time with him as well. So it was we're at another waiting point. We're kind of waiting to see what happens here. I wish we had a little bit more to be able to tell y'all. We still think Auburn sits in a good spot to be able to get it done. Wouldn't be shocked if he's back again for the New Mexico game based on some early conversations I've had this week. But we don't really – I mean, Deuce Knight hasn't interviewed with anybody. He hasn't really gone public on the record with anybody about anything. So we're kind of stuck in a little bit of a limbo. What we think we know what will happen, but when will it happen? And we're still kind of stuck waiting for that.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. If you Deuce Knight, Saturday might give you a little bit of pause, but you're committed to Notre Dame, and they lost at home to Northern Illinois. So that
was the best thing to happen to Auburn.
Well, and that's the world. If you're looking for teams that never lose games, then there's only 2 guys. You start talking about, well, you look at Georgia and you look at, maybe Ohio State. I mean, like those teams recruit well for a reason. Yes, they recruit well because they win, but for everybody else, like there has to be something else other than just wins and losses. You're going, hey, I believe in what they're doing. I know they need me, whatever it is, because teams are going to lose football games. That's just the nature of the beast.
Yes. So again, that's been the most asked about question is, does Auburn's loss impact things with Deuce Knight? Don't think so. I did drop him on my big board percentage wise a little bit. That mostly just came from the fact that things are dragging on longer
Just
than
hadn't done it yet.
we thought they would. And usually your ears perk up a little bit. You get some warning signs a little bit, I guess, if things don't happen. Again, still think Auburn sits in a good position to get it done, but you have to be a little more cautious the way things drag out a little bit longer. So we'll see what happens there. See if he shows up for a third straight game. Look, I mean, if he shows up for the third straight Auburn home game against New Mexico, for that matter, I don't know how much longer it's really going to drag out. I feel like, especially from both sides, to be honest, because I think Notre Dame wants to know, do they need to start getting another guy? Our Notre Dame site had a great recruiting insider that I read earlier today on Monday talking about how they were engaging with another quarterback, the Stanford quarterback commit, trying to see where things kind of stand there a little bit. So it leaves both programs in limbo a little bit. I mean, Auburn wants its quarterback because they want to push for a top 3 class in the country. Notre Dame wants to know if it still has its quarterback or if it needs to go get another guy. It's kind of, and look, I get it's tough. It is extremely tough at that age, 17, 18 years old. You have to make a 40-year decision about where you want to go play, college football. That'll impact the rest of your life, get into the league, all those things. But it's getting to a point where both of these programs are kind of going to need an answer at some point here soon, one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting now is when you think about Auburn in terms of quarterback, obviously what we saw on the field Saturday, we talked about that in some different shows, so we won't go into a whole lot of detail about that. But we talked about prior to this year, we expected Auburn to sign a quarterback in the 2025 class. And we also expected Auburn to probably go after a transfer quarterback in the 2025 class. What's interesting is that you're looking at potentially, we may get a look at what Hank Brown can do the rest of this season, or Holden Garner. Heck, it could be Walker White before it's over with. Would somebody get enough experience and would they play well enough that you might go, hey, we feel pretty good? That's a long way off from happening. But I think you're looking at it more than likely. Even if you get Deuce Knight, looking at trying to find somebody with some experience to come in and compete for that job next year. And so there's a whole lot of quarterback stuff still left to happen.
Jason, I think the next guy we're going to touch on a little bit is Sam Turner, who caught plenty of attention for some of the quotes that he had after the game. Look, he did not hold anything back in terms of his honest thoughts on the game. Said that, as a wide receiver, for those that don't know, he's a Georgia Tech wide receiver commitment, visited Auburn for Big Cat weekend, wanted to try and decide before his high school season started, wasn't able to come to a decision between Auburn and Georgia Tech, was back in Auburn over the weekend. And he said, look, I love it here. I love the atmosphere. I love the game. But he left a little shaky about the offense, as just about every Auburn fan did for that matter. And he was brutally honest. And I appreciate his honesty in, a post-visit interview talking about it. And if there is one guy, I guess, that you could say does a loss impact recruiting, maybe a little bit with Sam Turner. But again, it goes back to the selling point of saying, look, Sam, if you're here, things are a little bit different with you. And for that matter, he even mentioned, he said that he wasn't necessarily blown away by the quarterback play. And he said, if Deuce Knight were to come, that would change things. That would change things for him. So an interesting predicament where Auburn maybe dinged itself a little bit and will have to work a little bit harder to get Sam Turner.
Yeah, and obviously committed to Georgia Tech, and I just looked, and Haynes King hadn't turned the ball over, and he's run it, but he's averaging about 200 yards passing a game and has 3 touchdowns in 3 games. So, so it's not like Georgia Tech is a thing, that's a juggernaut passing the football offensively. I do think that there's less guys to have to climb over at Georgia Tech than there would be at Auburn. I think that's some of it too, that you have to start thinking about going, man, that might be something to watch for. But Again, I think when you're a guy like that that's already committed, just like Deuce is, and maybe it's enough to give you pause. Do I think it impacts greatly? One game impacts greatly one player's decision? Not really. I don't think so. If it does, then they're probably looking for a reason to go somewhere else anyway. And so, in the end, I think Sam Turner's a guy that obviously would love to have, but this is a very fluid situation because I think there's some other wide receivers that could eventually pop up on this board, especially if you get a little passing game going and you still start to build a little bit of momentum in the next couple of weeks.
No, I agree completely. I think the quotes read a lot worse than they necessarily
Yeah.
were. And especially, we're talking to these guys as soon as the game is over. Raw reaction, boom. You just watch the game. What are your instant thoughts? Not, people on the message board will have, the 24-hour rule, the 48-hour rule before the post. So for
Not many of them, not this week.
not many. Some of them will.
Yeah.
But, we talked to Sam Turner as the clock hit zero.
Correct.
So
If I had written, well, I wrote a few minutes after, but if 5 minutes after the game, it would have been a lot harsher than it was even, an hour or so later. It's raw. Sometimes it's really instant. But once you talk to coaches again, he has a chance to talk to Marcus and some of these other guys, then I'm sure it's a matter of fact, okay, let's just wait and see what happens.
yeah, and the other interesting thing too is I talked to a source at Auburn kind of about that and just mentioned, hey, this was an interesting interview, and they said good. They said good. I'm glad that there's a guy that's upset about the way the game ended on Saturday, and they're not just accepting what happened against Cal. He said rather have competitive players and competitive guys that they're recruiting that aren't going to stand for what happened against Cal. So found that interesting as well. Jason, another 2025 name that we'll touch on real quick here, Joseph Mbachu, the Florida defensive line commit, was in Auburn for his first visit since being offered late in the offseason, got offered, I want to say in August. He's a guy who literally put on pads for the very first time this spring and started playing football a little bit. Originally from Cameroon, was a basketball player over at Grayson, transitioned to playing football. Very raw, a lot of explosive talent there along the defensive line that will need to be refined over time. But he's a guy who, look, Auburn's recruiting defensive line really, really well. They've got 4 D-line committed under Vontrell King-Williams and Malik Autry, Jordan Crawford, Antonio Coleman, Nate Marshall. And Mbachu, they're still interested in getting really as many defensive linemen as they can get. And Mbachu would be an interesting piece because he's obviously not as good as those guys yet, but he has the talent to maybe get there. If you're recruiting, a 5th or a 6th guy on the defensive line, it's hard to get 5 or 6 guys to the talent level you already have. Maybe Mbachu is a guy that kind of makes sense there. Didn't get to talk to him after the game, so not really sure where things went, but he's definitely a guy we know that Auburn has interest in.
Yeah, it's all upside potential when you look at size, athleticism, quickness. He just hasn't played any football, and so we saw him play Thompson early in the season, and he didn't play a whole lot. I think he's a guy that teams are going, hey, let's count on the upside there for a guy like Mbachu and look at him and see maybe that's a guy that comes in and plays a little bit, grows into it. It reminds me in reverse a little bit of a guy like Prince Tega Jr., where you go, man, you look how big and how athletic he is, but it's going to take a little while. Can you afford to do that now as this thing morphs to that 105 number and maybe you have a few more scholarships? I think he becomes a really intriguing guy. I think you can afford to then sign maybe an extra guy on each side of the ball than you normally would have to use an extra interior defensive lineman, an extra offensive lineman to try to bolster some of those groups and to give yourself a little more of a safety net, because that you're going to miss. You're not going to bat 1,000 in any position, no matter what you do, and no matter how good your class is. You're going to miss on guys. So the more of those guys you can get up there that are big and strong and athletic, the better off you are.
Yeah, you mentioned Prince Tega. For me, he kind of more recently, he just reminds me of Favor Edwin last year a little bit, to be honest. Just a guy who has a lot of talent, a lot of size, but a lot of refining still to do. Just going to mention these names real quick, not really going to go in depth on them. Anthony Tank Jones, the 5-star edge rusher in the 2026 class, he was back. Anthony Davis, the 4-star linebacker from Grayson. The pair of 26 guys from Langston Hughes and running back Carson Baker and Xavier Tiller. Probably touch on those guys a tiny bit more here in a second. Receiver Tristan Keys from Hattiesburg. He's the number 1 player in Mississippi in the 26 class. A lot of 26 guys were there that were pretty good. Talked to them. And then in 2027, guy like Xavier Crowell from Jackson, he was there. Ellis McGaskin from Williamson. Bobby Coleman has been at like every game and every event really since Cam has been here. He was there again as well. So strong group of underclassmen guys. Unsure what the list will look like this Saturday against New Mexico. Do know that Malik Autry's taken his official visit this weekend for homecoming. Might be another guy, another commitment, take his OV as well, but not sure on that one quite yet. Jason, I mentioned the Langston Hughes guys. I think when we'll wrap up here, we'll talk about Friday night, we were up in Douglasville, Georgia, watched Douglas County play up against Langston Hughes. Douglas County is home to a composite 5-star edge rusher in the 2026 class, Jordan Carter, who you got a chance to talk with. 2027 offensive tackle Joshua Samapel, who is about 6'7", 350-ish, probably somewhere there.
He may not be 350, but he is big and athletic. Yeah. Looks really good.
Yes, him and then 2 elite 2026 receivers in Devin Carter and Aaron Gregory. Look, we're going to have full visit updates on all of those guys at auburnundercover.com. Haven't quite used those interviews yet. But Jason, before we get onto the Langston Hughes side, your thoughts on, talking with Jordan Carter. He was injured and then got injured even more during the game, so that was a little tough. But watching him play a little bit, as he's kind of one of Auburn's top edge guys there in the 2026 class.
Yeah, athletic, powerful. Reminds you a little bit of like Joe Phillips when you look at him going. He's not the 6'4", 6'5", long edge rusher, but he's powerful, explosive, and he loves Auburn. It's early on for him, but he could not talk enough about Hugh Freeze and Josh Aldridge and kind of the relationship he's built with him and things going on at Auburn and building classes, all that. So, yeah, I think Auburn is a school that absolutely is going to be in play for him, as he moves forward in this thing. Just a junior and got a long way to go, but that would be a guy that I would expect to see a couple of times, maybe later in the year on campus if things work out right.
Yeah, and then I talked with both of the receivers, Devin Carter and Aaron Gregory. Look, both have pretty high interest in Auburn. Neither one of them have visits scheduled quite yet, but Auburn is definitely a school they know they want to get to this fall. Auburn has pushed pretty hard for both of those guys. Douglas County didn't really throw the ball a whole lot, so don't really have a whole lot of scouting on both those guys. But look, we've seen enough film, we've watched enough highlight reels, watched them at Under Armour Atlanta, camps like that, to know that they're both going to be really good. And they're obviously both ranked in the top 100 as players, not just as receivers, for a reason.
Yeah, and for the old school folks that are my age, 50s and older, Devin Carter is the son of Dexter Carter, who was a Florida State legend and kind of really one of the guys in that mid 80s to late 80s that helped take Florida State's program to the next level. When he's talking about him as a running back, doing things out of the backfield, speed, I said Devin looks just like him. He's not a big guy, but he can run, and you can see the athleticism. So that's a little connection for Devin Carter.
Yeah, switching sides over to Langston Hughes, Jason, obviously home to Auburn offensive tackle commit Tavares Dice, a guy who really pretty flexible along the whole entire offensive line. Carson Baker, the 2026 running back, and Xavier Tiller, the 2026 tight end. All three of those guys were in Auburn over the weekend, played first on Friday night. Jason, first, your thoughts kind of on Tavares Dice and what he showed you. I mean, we've seen him before, but what he showed you on Friday.
Yeah, I think Dice is a guy that I really enjoy watching play because I think he is, this is a big week for versatility. When you talk about Auburn's offensive line, you go versatility, where a guy like Dylan Wade. Okay, he's playing inside a guard. We need him outside of tackle maybe this week. Maybe I think of Tavares Dice as the same guy. I think Tavares Dice can be a right tackle. I think he can play outside, but he may be better suited to be an inside guy. But then you start looking at Auburn and start looking at the commitments and the building of the classes and having a guy like Braden Joyner that's played extremely well, a guy that'll probably see some action this week, redshirt freshman. Then you think about DeAndre Carter on campus as a true freshman. Then you think about already in this 2025 class, the interior guys, especially from Benedictine, the big boy.
Jacoby Ward.
Jacoby Ward is the guy they feel like is, potential NFL. When you combine him and DeAndre Carter together, you may have a chance to have a really big, physical, brutal offensive line if you have a guy like Tavares Dice at right tackle, could potentially still have Connor Lew at center here in a couple of years. But, you got Kel Ellis committed. Braden Joyner can play. When I look at Dice, I look at versatility. I think physical, long arms, even though he's not 6'6". So he's a guy that I think could stay outside, but I like the mentality and a guy that has a ton of upside.
Jason, then Xavier Tillard. Look, Langston Hughes didn't really pass the ball a whole lot on Friday, so not a whole lot there in terms of watching him as a pass catcher. Was more advanced than I thought he would be as a blocker at this stage in his career. Did some solid things there. I think he only got one target in the game, and it was not to throw the quarterback under the bus, but it was kind of a hospital ball. Xavier Tillard was not in a great spot to catch that and not get crushed. So not a whole lot on him, but then Carson Baker. He's a guy that we really, really love. We've got to see him for the first time in the spring, and we knew about him going into that because he's a guy who Auburn was recruiting, had offered. He has track times and 100-meter at 10.65, I think is what it was.
Yeah, I think 10.56 actually, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So it was a guy that we were well aware of and really wanted to see in the spring. And even just in a practice and watching half a practice, just the way he was cutting and moving, it was like, okay, yeah, that's an SEC. That is a Power 4 elite running back. And getting to watch him play even more on Friday kind of asserted that for me, to be honest.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that if he has another good running back on the team with him at Langston Hughes, I think he's a guy that if you get 20 to 25 carries to, this is a guy that's 175 to 200 yards a game. I think that's what he is. And I think he is a guy that's longer body, kind of gives you that speed aspect, but he's a guy that can make some cuts and get downhill and do some things. So I was really impressed by Carson Baker going up against what's a physical and pretty talented defense on the other side Friday night. Tiller, I think Tiller's one of those guys you look at and you go, you can see it. It's raw. He's a former basketball guy too that is kind of transitioning to be more of a, I think the interesting thing is, you're right, he's a pretty aggressive blocker. He's a guy that can really get after you on the edge and did some really good things in sealing off some runs. I think his future is going to be as a kind of a true hybrid tight end, a guy that you can flex out, do some different things with. But the talent's there, fun team to watch, and I enjoyed just watching that game from a talent standpoint.
Jason, one name talking about Carson Baker that we probably should have talked about a little bit. Shakai Mills-Knight, he was back on campus, although seemed like it was more of a situation where some of his teammates were coming down. He's like, I'll come down as well. I want to see Auburn. From talking to a couple different people, it seems like Auburn is still in a much better spot with Usman Chroma than it is with Shakai Mills-Knight, who's obviously committed to Ole Miss. Didn't get a chance to talk with him after the game. Look, Auburn's still obviously recruiting him very heavily, but I would give Auburn a much, much better chance with Usman Chroma than I would with Shakai Mills-Knight at this stage.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you're right. I think it was more about just coming to hang out, enjoying the day, letting his younger teammates get a feel for Auburn and you got to kind of get to see everything. So, yeah, it sure feels like that one's still on the outside looking in for Auburn. And but you're right, Usman Chroma's still there. Alvin Henderson coming off a monster 400-plus yard game and either 9 or 10 touchdowns. Either way, it doesn't matter. He scored a bunch of touchdowns in an 80-78 4-overtime loss on Friday night. So Alvin is rolling towards putting up some pretty incredible numbers, through 3 weeks of the regular season.
Yeah, he's making his case for Mr. Football for sure in the state of Alabama. Jason, unless there's anything that I'm missing, I think we'll probably wrap it up there. Like I said, not really sure what the visit list will look like this Saturday. Besides, we do think there's a chance Deuce Knight is back on campus, so we'll see what happens there. Hopefully, if we can get some audio issues fixed in a variety of different manners, we'll have a recruiting update on Thursday for the live show at AU Club as well. No matter what, there will be a live show and there will be a recruiting update with Jason. Hopefully, I'll be able to hop in as well. Unsure where some things are at with that, but we're working our best, I promise, to get things fixed there. So, Jason, unless I'm missing anything, we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah, sounds good. Just looking forward to the rest of the week, getting on the road again this weekend to continue to see more of these guys and get a feel for watching them play and actually you kind of be able to gauge them a little bit better before they get to Auburn. So looking forward to that this weekend, and forward to a busy week, interesting Saturday coming up, and we'll be excited to be there and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll have that all covered at auburnundercover.com. For those here on the podcast feed and on the YouTube and whatnot, this podcast will be up on Tuesday. I believe the plan is to have Coach's Corner on Wednesdays. Fridays with Philip has officially been moved to Thursdays with Philip, I believe now. And then the live show on Thursday night going into an actual podcast feed on Friday, as long as things go to plan. And then Saturday, the usual, the pregame blitz, the postgame pod, all that stuff. So you guys can look forward to that. You guys can look forward to a ton of coverage at auburnundercover.com. And we will catch you guys again here soon.